Hi, I'm Bethany Raleigh, and today I'm going to tell the story of The Shoemaker and the Elves by the Brothers Grimm. I like this story because it talks about doing a good deed in secret. Once upon a time, there was an elderly shoemaker. He was a very honest and hard-working man, but he had fallen upon hard times. And one day he found himself with only enough leather to make one pair of shoes. However, this didn't get him down. That night, he took the leather, cut it out to make a pair of shoes, and set it on his workbench. That night he said his prayers, he left his cares to heaven, and he went to bed. He decided he would get up early in the morning and make his last pair of shoes. However, when he got up the next morning, he found a beautifully crafted pair of shoes just sitting on his workbench. He was amazed at the craftsmanship. The stitching was perfect, there were no flaws, it was the most beautiful pair of shoes he had ever seen. That same day, a customer came into his shop and was so amazed by this pair of shoes that he paid an extra high price for the shoes. The price was so high that the shoemaker was able to go out and buy enough leather to make 2 new pairs of shoes. That night he did the same thing. He cut out the leather for the shoes, set it on his workbench, and went to bed, intending to get up early the next morning. But the next morning, there were 2 beautifully crafted pairs of shoes on his bench. And that day, more customers came in and paid an extra high price for those 2 pairs of shoes. So that day, he went out and bought enough leather to buy 4 pairs of shoes. Well, this pattern continued for a couple of days. And before long, the shoemaker and his wife were very well off. They had enough money to pay the bills, put food on the table, and they were doing very well for themselves. But he was very puzzled as to why these shoes kept appearing on his workbench every morning when he got up. One night, the shoemaker and his wife were sitting beside the fire, and the shoemaker said to his wife, "Honey, I would really like to know who keeps coming into my shop every night and making these beautiful shoes. I think we should stay up tonight and see who's coming into my shop." His wife agreed that it was a good idea. So that night, they lit a candle and they hid in a corner of the shop behind a curtain and decided to stay up and watch to see who's coming into the shop. Well, that night, just after midnight, as the shoemaker and his wife were hiding behind the curtain, they saw these 2 little naked elves come sneaking into the shop. These little elves came bouncing in, they went up to the workbench, they took the leather that he had cut out and left sitting there, and they began working with their little fingers really quickly, sewing and wrapping and tapping at an amazing speed. The shoemaker was amazed at the workmanship these elves were doing. They worked very quickly with their little fingers, and they were done well before sunrise. And then, just as quickly as they had come in, they scampered out before anybody could see them. The shoemaker came out and saw the workmanship that they had done, and was amazed that these little men had done such beautiful work. The next day, the shoemaker's wife said to him, "Husband, it's near Christmas time, and I think we should be very grateful to these little men for what they've been doing for us. They've brought in a lot of money, and they've worked very hard. And, I think we should do something very kind for them." The shoemaker agreed. And the shoemaker's wife said, "I know. Why don't I make a pair of clothes for them? I'll make little shirts, little coats, little pants that are in their size, and you can make some shoes that are in their size. What do you think about that?" And the shoemaker, he thought that was a good idea, to thank these little men for all their hard work. So that night, the shoemaker's wife made the clothes, and the shoemaker made the little shoes, and they set them on the workbench so that the elves would see them when they came in that night. And that night, the shoemaker and his wife lit a candle, and they hid behind the curtain. And sure enough, after midnight, the little elves came scampering in, as they always did. They ran up to the workbench, and when they saw the clothes and the little shoes that had been set out for them, they began laughing and giggling and jumping around. They quickly put on the clothes and put on the shoes, and they laughed and scampered about with joy. And just as quickly as they could, they scampered out of the shop and ran over the green, and they were never seen or heard from again. Now, the shoemaker and his wife were very happy, and they continued to do very well for themselves, and they were very satisfied and did well for the rest of their lives. The end. Now, I hope this story reminds all of us to do a good deed for someone else, even if that person doesn't know it was you who did the good deed. Thank you for listening.